Draco Malfoy and the cousin he'd never asked for. Thank you very much. But Draco will hear about this. Chapter 5. As Pets, as Owners. Sadly, the piece Draco had drafted following the revelation of Black's crimes was short-lived. Christmas brought a mysterious firebolt into Harry's possession, and while that would have filled Draco with awe and envy under normal circumstances, there was no information as to the origin of said broom. Draco could not blame Hermione for alerting McGonagall, who consequently confiscated it for examination. She was quite justified in her fear that the present might really be a death trap of Black's. But he could have warned her that patronizing Harry that way, no matter how right she was in doing it, would be enough to make an already tense Harry explode. Draco was not present for the fight that ensued, the main events having taken place in the Gryffindor Tower, but he was the one who had to tread the lines of the battlefield, consoling a Hermione who was permanently one step away from bursting into tears and trying to talk down a Harry who refused to see reason. Weasley, quite unhelpfully, sided with Harry, proceeding to give Hermione the cold shoulder, and it did not endear the other boy to Draco at all. As a result, Draco and Hermione spent a lot of time together in the library, far away from both Gryffindor boys, and buried under their mountain of coursework. "Do you think they'll ever forgive me?" Hermione whispered one of these afternoons, looking up at Draco for her arithmancy essay with watery eyes. "Of course they'll forgive you," Draco frowned. "Well, I can't speak for Weasley because he's as predictable as a demiguise, but Harry's gonna come around at some points. I think it's just too much at the moment, especially after the whole thing with Black and his parents." "I should have let you handle it," she whispered ruefully. "You would have gotten away with it." Draco snorted. "You overestimate me," he told her. "He'd have been just as angry at me. Well, I might have approached the matter differently, but..." When Hermione looked wounded at his words, he added, "It doesn't change that you did the right thing in the end. There is a huge possibility that this broom is cursed. You know it, and I know it. Someone needed to make sure whether it's safe, and we weren't qualified." "Thank you," Hermione muttered, letting her hair fall into her face to hide the tears that were probably falling. Draco looked back to his essay, kindly pretending that he had not noticed. "You always seem to be the only one who understands." "That's because the only one who can rival my intellect is you," Draco said offhandedly, relieved when he heard a hesitant chuckle. Draco hoped that with the start of lessons in the new year, the situation would relax a little. Harry finally began his Patronus sessions with Lupin, and while he did not tell Draco much about what happened in the hours he spent with the teacher, he seemed a little more at ease after each meeting. Hermione, on the other hand, got progressively worse. Their coursework increased ruthlessly with each day, and that combined with the strain of her fight with Harry and Weasley broke her like Draco had never experienced before. Draco tried to help, he really did, going as far as dragging her under the time turner out of schedule to give them a couple of extra hours and subsequently allowing them to squeeze in a bit of sleep. But things were made more difficult by the fact that his energy was running dangerously low as well. It was with that realization, after one especially gruesome divination lesson, that he joined Hermione in the library in grim determination. "I quit," he announced, watching as the Gryffindor girl blinked at him, dark shadows in her eyes. "Quit what?" she asked, confused. "Divination," Draco clarified. "It's a useless subject with an even more useless teacher, and I refuse to give myself such a headache over it. If I quit divination, I can go back to a normal timetable, and I can finally leave this madness behind me." "So you're abandoning me?" Hermione demanded, her voice high-pitched. "I'm not abandoning you," Draco scowled. "I'm setting an example that I'm begging you to follow. One of us has to be reasonable here, and it's obviously not going to be you." "Don't turn this on me!" Hermione snapped, eyes flashing angrily. "Just because you're lacking the determination to go through with what you started doesn't mean I am going to just throw away my education like that." Her words stung, but Draco forced himself to let them slip, knowing she was overworked and not to be held accountable for anything she said. "I'm not asking you to drop out of school," Draco pointed out, as calmly as he could manage. "I am merely suggesting that you reconsider trading in your health and sanity for subjects that are not going to help you in your future career." "You don't know whether or not they'll help me," she shrieked, causing some other students to turn their head towards them, staring. Oh, because you're going to be sitting in Nocturne Alley for the rest of your life reading poems for a couple of coins, Draco is sarcastically. Because that's all you're going to learn from that fraud Trelawney! Stop it! Hermione snapped, getting to her feet. If you really want to, then you can drop as many subjects as you want. What do I care what you do? But leave me out of it! Miss Granger! The librarian, Madame Pince, called from across the room. Either you're going to lower your tone of voice or you will leave. Hermione looked sufficiently abashed for a moment, sitting back down and hovering over whatever homework she was doing. It was Draco, instead, who got up to take his leave. Fine, he muttered, just loud enough for Hermione to hear it. Go ahead. Don't listen to me. But don't come crying about your workload again, because, quite frankly, I'm sick of hearing about it. His friend did not look up from her book when she left, but Draco thought he could see a tear fall onto one of the pages. For the week after that, Hermione avoided Draco. For the first day or two, Draco got a grim satisfaction out of that. At least now we could spend some time with Harry instead of babysitting that maniacal know-it-all. But that nasty line of thought soon gave way to worry. I don't know what you're feeling guilty about. Weasley rolled his eyes when Draco voiced his thoughts to them one afternoon on the way down to Hagrid's class. She went off on you for turning your back on a class she hates as much as all of us. Have you not heard how she talks about Trelawney? One of these days, Pavani and Lavender will push her down the stairs to that horrible classroom, and I'm not going to stop them. Well, she's not wrong, Draco grumbled. And I wouldn't expect you to understand, Weasley, thank you very much. You were the one talking about it. Weasley got clearly stung. Anyway, Draco said, pointedly, ignoring Weasley and turning to Harry, who seemed uncomfortable with the subject, which Draco hoped very much was a sign of either guilt or worry, or possibly both. She's working herself to death, and you know as well as I do that she just lashed out at me because you have been ignoring her for weeks now, as if she was some kind of dragon-pox-infested flubberworm. Harry remained silent, and Draco continued, If you'd just reach out to her, it would be a big help, you know? Why don't you do it yourself, then? Weasley grumbled. You're the one who misses her, not us. Because, as I told you at the beginning of this friendly discussion, she's avoiding me! Draco groaned, glaring at Weasley. Plus, my head is not as far up my own arse as yours, Weasley. I can admit to feeling bad about fighting with a friend, while all you seem to be capable of is stubbornly clinging to that bit of pride you could scramble off the floor, you idiotic— We're there, Harry announced, effectively interrupting their heated argument and forcing Draco to let the topic drop. When Draco was about to return to the Slytherin quarters that evening, though, Hermione was lingering in the entrance hall, her eyes red and puffy, and an air of despair hovering over her like Peeves on a mission. He came to an abrupt halt, and Hermione looked up, startled by the noise. There was a tense silence, and then she cleared her voice, whispering almost too low for Draco to hear across the hall. Hi. Hi, Draco murmured her, his voice gentle. He took a couple of careful steps towards her, trying not to startle her out of whatever frail determination she seemed to have gathered. Hermione sniffed once, and Draco saw tears hanging on her lashes a moment before he found himself enveloped in a bone-crushing embrace. That girl might be a head shorter than him, but by Merlin she had strength. I'm so sorry, Draco, she sobbed. I know I had no place talking to you that way, and you have every right to be furious with me. I've been horrible to you, and I know I'm a mess, and I can't blame you for not wanting to be around me. Hermione, Draco interrupted her, slightly breathless from the way she was clinging to him. It's okay. It's not okay, she wailed. You've been such a good friend to me, and So you had a nervous breakdown and lashed out at me, Draco shrugged, squeezing her shoulder in comfort. Happens in the best of friendships. Salazar knows I'm no saint when it comes to sudden grumpy fits. I say you stop crying and we forget the whole thing. If anything, that made Hermione cry even harder. And with a sigh, Draco patted her head and let himself be hugged under the floodwind. Draco had clung to the hope that as soon as McGonagall returned Harry's firebolt to him, with or without a result confirming Hermione's suspicion, Harry would get over himself and forgive her meddling. And when that moment finally came, a couple of days before Gryffindor's match against Ravenclaw, Draco seemed to be proven right, if only for an instant. That was, though, until Weasley discovered that Scabbers was missing, and hell broke loose all over again. Draco felt personally insulted by the universe at this point. It had taken him weeks to push everyone to the point where they could be friends again, and then just like that, it all slipped through his fingers again. Weasley was more furious than ever, and while Harry seemed to have forgiven Hermione, he still stuck to the stupid ginger's side in a show of the same loyalty that had kept Weasley on Harry's side throughout his own feud with Hermione. It was the understatement of the century, therefore, to say that Draco was frustrated enough to skip Gryffindor's match for the first time ever. Hermione had barricaded herself in the common room, and the prospect of being alone with Weasley all afternoon was too much to bear. So he spent the afternoon in his own dormitory, far away from everyone, and brooding in solitude. When he went down for breakfast the next morning, he was more than ready to give them all a good piece of his mind. He was done walking the lines between them, and his Gryffindor friends were going to get over themselves and be friendly with each other, or so help him, they would find out how cruel the wrath of a Slytherin could be. He found Harry and Weasley already at the Gryffindor table in a serious conversation with Longbottom, Thomas, and Finnegan, and made his way over to them in determination. He stopped behind them and opened his mouth to start ranting, but before he could get a word out, Harry jumped up and grabbed his elbow, his face urgent. "I have to talk to you," he muttered. "Now!" And just like that, Draco's speech died in his throat, and he found himself dragged out of the castle. Weasley stayed behind with the other Gryffindors, apparently not bothered enough to follow. "What in Merlin's name?" Draco began as the entrance door fell closed after them. It was February, and it was cold, and he had not brought his cloak. But in that moment, Harry came to a stop and turned to face him. "Sirius Black broke into our dormitory last night," he told him. Draco stared at him, his mind wiped blank by white panic the moment he registered the information. "Excuse me?" he whispered. "Neville lost his notes for the password to the common room." "What kind of idiot—" "Never mind that now," Harry interrupted him impatiently. "The point is, Black found them, and he got into our dorm. He must have been looking for me, but he got confused because when Ron woke, he was leaning over him, holding a knife." "Oh dear," Draco muttered, feeling numbed by overwhelming fear. "Ron screamed, and when everyone woke, Black ran," Harry finished. "Salazar," Draco breathed. "You could have been killed! If he'd found you right away, he'd have—" Then he held in, the fog in his mind clearing a little. "Wait, he ran?" he asked. "Yes," Harry nodded. "Why would he run?" Draco frowned. "Even if Weasley had woken up the whole tower, Black of all people has no need to be afraid of a bunch of kids, does he?" "Maybe he thought he wouldn't be able to escape with so many witnesses," Harry suggested. "When have witnesses ever bothered Black?" Draco pointed out. "He walked out a whole street and didn't bother to run. And he had you right in front of him, and he did nothing. It doesn't make sense," he concluded, dumbstruck. Harry was watching him, now thoughtful himself. "I did not think of that," he admitted. "That really is odd." "Yeah," Draco nodded, biting his lip. Then he shook that thought off and asked, "So I assume they didn't catch him, did they?" "No," Harry said bitterly. "He escaped before anyone could alert McGonagall." "How does he get into the castle?" Draco demanded. "Have you checked the map?" "No," Harry sighed. "There was no time." "Maybe Hermione's right," Draco mused. "Maybe you should hand it in." "You think?" Harry asked, looking abashed. "I don't know," he groaned. "I mean, it would be a waste in all honesty, but we should do anything we can to keep Black out, and that map might hold an answer the teachers have been searching for." "He can't have gotten in through the passageways on the map, though," Harry argued, an edge to his voice. "It's impossible, I told you. They're impassable to him." "How can you be sure?" Draco prodded. "We can't assume to know each and every one of Black's secrets, Harry. He might have found a way to pass them. One that wouldn't even occur to us because we don't think like dark wizards." Harry did not answer, but he looked sufficiently guilty. "All right," Draco muttered. "I get it, you don't want to hand out the map. I wouldn't either if I were you. But we have to tell someone what we know, with or without pointing to the map." "You think we can tell anyone about the secret passageways without explaining how we know about them?" Harry asked dubiously. "You can't!" Draco rolled his eyes. "You're a horrible liar! I blame it on your house! You are all useless!" He saw Harry bristling at his words, but gave him no chance to argue, instead continuing, "No, it's got to be me." "You would?" Harry asked, indignation being replaced by honest surprise. "Honestly, Harry," Draco scoffed. When did I ever refuse to do anything for you? Whenever you thought I was being stupid, Harry answered without missing a beat. Fair enough, Draco chuckled. Let me rephrase then. When have I ever refused to do anything that I felt was for your best? Harry smiled at that. Thank you, he said. I owe you. Oh, you do, Draco agreed, glaring at him. And I have one word for you. Hermione! Harry flinched. I'll talk to Ron and see what I can do, he suggested rather reluctantly. Too right you will, Draco hissed, because I'm honestly sick of all the Gryffindor drama. It's giving me a headache. You're one to talk about drama, Harry snorted. One more word and I'll go straight to Snape and tell them about the map, Draco threatened. Jeez, all right, Harry groaned, holding up his hands in surrender. I'll talk to Ron. Good. Draco crossed his arms, both to make his point and fight off the cold. And now could we please go back inside? Preferably before we turn into ice sculptures in the entranceway. The time for Christmas decoration is over. Draco, Professor Lupin sighed, sending him a rather amused smile as the last Slytherin students filtered out of the Defense Against the Dark Arts classroom. From the pattern of our conversations until now, I'm beginning to feel quite distressed every time you call me out. I'm sorry, Draco said sheepishly. It's nothing bad, I promise. I just have some information for you. Information? Lupin asked, raising a curious eyebrow at him. Draco had decided, after some thorough consideration, that Professor Lupin would be the best teacher to approach about the passageways. Not only was he the closest to their age and had always been remarkably kind to him, but he also seemed the least likely to ask uncomfortable questions. It's about Sirius Black, Draco admitted, and the way he might have entered the castle. Oh dear, Lupin muttered, his sigh heavier this time. Please, Draco, follow me into my office. They did not speak on the short way up the stairs, and when the door closed behind him, Lupin wordlessly started to prepare tea and gestured for Draco to sit. This way we can't be overheard, he noted wearily. The air is slightly tense among the staff, and we don't want anyone to catch pieces of our conversation and jump to conclusions. True, Draco agreed, making a face. I came to you for confidentiality in the first place. I'm a teacher, Draco, Lupin noted, though not unkindly. You realize I am bound to report everything you tell me, should it prove to be of importance. I do, Draco said quickly. I just hoped you might be less likely to press me about my sources compared to your colleagues. I see, Lupin chuckled, handing Draco his cup of tea and taking his own place behind the desk. Well, having been James Potter's friend at school, I cannot deny that I have a past of, let's say, bending the school rules a little myself. So I won't ask you to reveal anything of that nature unless I deem it absolutely necessary. Is that acceptable to you? Yes, Draco smiled. Thank you. Oh, Lupin said, folding his hands in his lap and looking at them curiously. What is it you want to tell me? We suspect that there are some secret passageways in and out of the school that Mr. Filch might not be aware of, Draco explained. We don't think Black could have entered through them, but it felt wrong to not alert anyone of their existence. And what are these passageways? Lupin asked. Well, one is behind the mirror on the 4th floor, but he seems to have caved in. Draco counted off, trying to remember exactly what Harry had told him. One is behind the statue of Gunhilda the Gorsemore, and it leads directly to the cellar of Honeydukes, Lupin finished, smiling so widely that it was almost a smirk. And I reckon the last one starts from underneath the lumping pillow. You know them? Draco asked, his eyes wide. I do, Lupin confirmed, though I assume not many do. We've gone on quite some adventures as kids, not unlike Harry and you, I assume. That means Black knew about them too, Draco thought out loud. The smile fell from Lupin's face and he looked guilty and very, very tired. You're right, he nodded. He would. I should speak to the headmaster about it. A tense silence fell upon them, and Draco scrambled for something to say, unwilling to take off on such a note. Did you talk to Harry about his parents? He asked finally, and Lupin met his eyes again, perplexed. He did not tell you? No, Draco frowned. But Harry is not exactly one to talk about his feelings unless forced. I see. Lupin chuckled, a smile slowly returning to his face. Well, you can rest assured. We've had more than one conversation about his parents throughout the extra lessons I'm giving him. For details, you will have to ask him, though. I don't need them, Draco said quickly. So is he making progress on the Patronus charm? Slowly but steadily, Lupin nodded. Harry has a lot of potential. Raw magical talent, not unlike his father, though he's not as book-smart as his mother. And again, few are. He has Hermione and me for that, Draco shrugged, making Lupin laugh. Yes, the teacher agreed. I assume he does. While Draco had dutifully kept his side of the bargain, Harry wasn't as successful with his promise. To his defense, though, it wasn't exactly his fault that Weasley was such a horrible pighead. Harry had gone out of his way to be nice to Hermione and strike conversations. Weasley had been the one to take off like a sulky rampant every time he did. It'll come around, Harry told Hermione when she seemed ready to burst into tears after one of these events. Give him some time. I'm more inclined to give him a fist in the face at this point, Draco muttered darkly. Hermione, for her part, was operating on increasingly negative energy levels. Draco did not speak to her about dropping classes again, afraid to start another rather counterproductive fight, but he was more than a little sure that the situation would blow up rather sooner than later, and it turned out he was right. The victim of Hermione's breakdown was, quite unexpectedly and much to Draco's amusement, Theodore Nott. It had not even been a particularly vexing event that had caused it. Draco and Hermione had just been making their way out of arithmancy, Hermione about to use the time turner for the second time that day to get to divination, when Nott had bumped into Draco in a usual fit of nastiness, causing Draco to drop his books. Watch it, Malfoy, Nott had snickered. If you get any of that mudblood slime you've been drenched in on me, I'll have you pay for a new uniform. Draco had just rolled his eyes and bent out to retrieve his books, set on ignoring Nott as he usually did. It had cost him to miss Hermione's movement, but when he heard the sound of an impact, he looked up and stared incredulously. Nott was lying on the floor, holding his cheek and gaping at Hermione with wide eyes. Crabbe and Goyle, at his right, looked at each other in alarm, clearly at a loss on how to react. Hermione stood over Nott, shaking out her wrist, her face flushed with rage. Stay away from Draco, she spat. He's 10 times the person you are not. You're nothing more than scum. With that, she whirled around, dashing down the corridor faster than Draco could react. All he could do was stare after her in shock. What the heck? Whimpered Nott, and for once Draco quite agreed. Hermione dropped divination, Draco repeated incredulously at lunch, having come to sit at the Gryffindor table to inquire about Hermione's absence from it. Yes, Harry confirmed, sounding stunned himself. She just got up and left in the middle of the class after a slight disagreement with Trelawney. Well, Draco frowned. I can't say I disapprove exactly, but it's out of character. Harry finished his sentence for him, and Draco nodded. Is it true she punched Nott for being an arse to you? News travels fast, I see, Draco noted. Honestly, I still thought I must have imagined that. I wish I had been there to see it, Weasley said mournfully. Could you not have taken a photo, Malfoy? It'll happen too quickly, Draco answered automatically before realizing who he was talking to and narrowed his eyes. And, he said pointedly, even if I had, I would not have shown you for the way you've been treating Hermione in the last couple of months. Weasley flushed at that, but for once he did not fight back. Weasley was unsure whether it was his words or the fact that Hermione had punched Nott, but that night in the common room, Weasley finally made up with her.